All right, everyone. Thank you for tuning into another episode of When Coffee Meets Tea. I'm Rob Gerard.
I'm Denise Bertolovitz.
Denise, it feels great to be here. It's another podcast, another episode, and it feels good.
It feels really good. It feels really good. Somebody asked me today if I was cold, and I'm like, no. They're like, I'm freezing, but it's like 32 degrees out. So I guess the answer should have been I should have been cold, but
Yeah,
I should have said no. I'm hot. I'm hot.
Well, it's the warm weather's coming, and that's something that I'm definitely looking forward to. Just the warm weather in general. It just does something to the soul. You know what I
Oh my
mean?
God, doesn't it? It's like it could be 5 degrees out, but as long as the sun is shining and I feel that warmth, I'm just so happy. It's like, oh, there's hope. There is hope.
And you know what? And not that this is going to lead perfectly into I think what our topic is, but I totally agree. Like when it comes to the sunshine, the sun definitely does something, and I think that's where seasonal affective disorder, seasonal depression kind of comes in. And whenever I think of this, right, I think probably a lot of us do. I think about the people like in Alaska, right, in places where the sunshine doesn't shine sometimes for weeks and
Hmm.
months on end. I mean, you have to be extremely resilient
Oh
and
gosh,
right
yes.
to really get through those super dark months. So, isn't that nuts? Like, could you live in Alaska, do you think?
Me personally, no. Would I want to visit? Absolutely. And it's
Mm.
interesting you said that, right? Because you wonder if they have adapted to this from a resilient perspective, or have they adapted, or are they just used to the environment? Because a lot of people say, oh well, if you grow up there you're just used to that, right? But that's not necessarily the case, because seasonal affective disorder is real, and that's not necessarily just because you grow up somewhere that you're not going to be impacted by the weather, right? It's your resilience, your choices, your coping skills, what you do to adapt to that, to I guess get comfortable, right, with living in that environment. But to answer your question, no, I would not want to live in Alaska. I do have a follower that engages with me. They live in Alaska. They're an
Wow.
older couple in
Wow.
their 60s. They grew up there, and they're Alaska tree climber.
What?
And she makes all these clothes. And the other day, he told this great story. He was snow plowing, and he had this young gentleman come and deliver wood, and he paid the guy $300 for the wood. Long story short, he had gone out the next day to go do some more shoveling, and the $300, he found a $100 bill here, a $100 bill here, and a $100 bill here. What would you do? Dude, like, would you want to keep that money? So that was his post. He's like, what would you do? So then he continued to tell the story of how he
So hold
called
on.
him
Hold
and
on. So you're saying he paid the guy $300 and
and the
then the
guy
guy
lost
dropped
it.
the
He
money.
just dropped the money and lost it,
Yeah.
on the property. So then he went and he called the young gentleman that had delivered the wood and said, "Did you lose something on my property?" And he said, "Yeah, I hate to say it, I lost the money that you gave me." And the Alaska tree climber, Instagram name, said, "Oh, I found it for you. So why don't you come by and pick it
Wow.
up?" Like, what are the odds of that?
Wow.
And what is the kindness there, right? The kindness of, would you do that? Like,
Yeah.
so I just love that story because it's kind of a little off our topic,
Yeah.
but I just thought it was really nice.
Well, big shout out to Alaskan Tree Climber.
Kindness.
That's for
Yep.
sure.
Yep.
And like resiliency, right? And something totally random, but I think of duct tape as being extremely resilient, right? Because I look around the room and Paul the intern when we were setting up the camera shots, and that's his new title, that's his new name. So even when he's not an intern anymore, he's always going to be Paul the intern. But so he's setting up the camera shots, and he's like, "Rob, do you have the duct tape?" I was like, "As a matter of fact, I do."
And I ran out of the room. I was
Listen,
like,
and it's because duct tape, in my opinion, is resilient.
this
But
is true.
Denise, you wanted to talk about this topic. You are the
Yes.
one that
Yes,
was
I
like,
did.
like, listen, let's talk about resiliency. And initially, I was a little apprehensive because I'm like, okay, with everything happening with the pandemic and stuff, just the idea or the topic of resiliency has been done to death, I'm sure, on podcasts, right? But
Hmm.
but even looking pandemic, right? Even looking past the year of 2020 going into 2021, talk to me about why you think and what you think of when I say the word resiliency, resilient. What do you think of?
Okay, so I love this topic, and yes, like it's probably way over spoken, but I want to speak on it in a different level. So when I think of resiliency, right, I think of the ability to bounce back from something that is traumatic or the ability to cope with change. Like when I think of resiliency, I don't think of it as a extreme, right? And I certainly don't think of it as something that everybody is born with. So, there's been debates about that. Some people say, "Oh, well, you're just more resilient than I am."
Well, kind of like
Okay.
nature versus nurture, right?
Absolutely.
Are you
Yeah.
born with it, or is it from your environment? Is it because of the way you were raised, or is it just something that you've been able to find where forged by the fire kind of thing?
And I do think it's interesting you said that, right? Because you are not born with it. However, I do think that, to your point, your environment will gear you toward the person that you're going to become. So here, for example, the reason why I wanted to talk about this is because resiliency is part of life. We all have it in us. However, some of us have not always had to use it, and some of us have had to use it because it's been a coping skill through our childhood, through traumatic experiences. But at the end of the day, even in adulthood, it's divorce. Okay, you have to have resiliency to come out of that and come back into the world. And resiliency, like being resilient, is a skill, and it's something that you either are forced to use as coping, which then is learned behavior or habit, or you learn it because you need to possibly, like in a career, let's say, you need to be able to have that resiliency, like in the medical field, right? They need to be resilient to constantly in an ER deal with that change,
So
right?
is
What's
it-
coming at me next?
Is
What
it
is
safe
that
to
change?
say that resiliency is a positive? Is that a positive?
It is a positive. Now, here is the thing. It is positive, and I truly believe, and I'll use myself as an example. Like many people have always said, you're so resilient. And I do believe that. Okay, I come from a big family, meaning this. I have one brother,
Yep.
a mom and dad, but my mom has 9 brothers and 1 sister. So growing up, my grandmother lived with us. We were constantly around people. There was constantly chaos and things going on and things that you had to adapt and overcome. My grandmother, I was young when my grandmother died. I was young, meaning 19. She was sick. So I've seen a lot of death in my life, between having and being a caretaker. So resilience has been my thing. However, I am now, and I'll tell my age, I am now 48, and I will be honest with you and tell you that life has caught up with me. And am I resilient? Yes. Do people still tell me that? Yes. However, there's been some things that have happened over the last couple years that have not allowed me to bounce back as fast as I normally would. And not ever going to be the same person that I was before. And that's not a bad thing. Like I have accepted that I'm not going to be the same. I'm going to do my best to be better, and change is constant. But what I used before to be resilient is not going to work this time because I am a different person. So my energy level is different. My needs are different. My environment's different. So resilience is just that ability to bounce back and get back into the world.
You know what's crazy too, and I love what you're saying is when you're describing this stuff, like I'm thinking about an athlete. I'm thinking about, an athlete who is, past his prime and realizing that he needs to maybe develop new skills because maybe his legs aren't working as much as they used to work. So now he has to develop new skills if he wants to continue to play the sport that he loves.
I love that you just said that because you actually validated me. And I appreciate that, like you as the therapist
How
on
so?
the show.
How so?
Because from that perspective of when you say because maybe your legs aren't working the same, or maybe there was an injury or something happened, and this is how I look at it, as my mind does not work the same. And that is not a bad thing. It's just that one one person can only take so many traumas, so many things coming at them,
Wow.
to a point where they get overwhelmed, and the way that they think, the way that they process changes.
Yeah.
And it's real. You know, ADHD is real. And I'll be the first to tell you, like, I'm fine to come out with it. I do have ADHD. I was diagnosed recently, over the last pretty much couple years. I guess kind of to a certain degree I had an idea, but it was from childhood, definitely. But I was considered highly functioning until that point where I couldn't go any further because of too many traumas and the way that I'm processing. So what I was doing before to be resilient is no longer working now.
Wow.
So to your point, I am injured. Am I a victim? No. Am I wounded? Is it horrible? No. Because there's resources. And I want to tell people that when you fall down, people will help you get up. And this is where I'm going with this, is resilience is something that in some cases we learn and it becomes natural to us, where in other cases we just have to learn to ask for help. So some people's resilience is just being brave enough to ask for help, to bounce back. And that's where a good therapist comes in, and the right environment and who you surround yourself with.
Well,
Pull you up.
And thank you for sharing that, by the way. Thank you very much for sharing that
Thank
with
you.
our audience.
You know
too.
what? I'm a little nervous. I think I might have some hives. I'm not going to lie, because, you know, that could go either way. You know, there's such a thing as being private, and I don't know. You know, some people say, well, you know, there's things of being private and you shouldn't share things with people because people can use that against you. Well, you know what? If I can help someone and know that you're not alone, it's okay. You know, it's okay.
Yeah.
And stop the stigma. I mean, we all have challenges,
Yeah.
and there's reasons why we do things, and it helps me understand why I've always been that late person.
And I appreciate you for sharing that, you know, because it's, I mean, let's face it, like you said, you know, I think we all, to an extent, you know, want to put our not best foot forward, but we always want to project, I think, to an extent that everything is okay. And, you know, and you being the motivational speaker and, you know, the life coach has kind of motivated me to, I guess, discuss some of the issues I've had. And, you know, same exact story as me, super high functioning, I felt like, for most of my life, you know. And then when I got in this field of being a therapist and working with the homeless or working with the inmate population inside the prisons and working with people that have been traumatized, I realized that I was actually starting to develop anxiety, and I was getting secondary trauma. You know, I was getting this vicarious trauma through listening to other people. And, you know, I realized about 5 years into the field that I was starting to get extreme anxiety. I was having what they call thoughts of impending doom, you know, or they call it invasive thinking, and thinking that the worst was going to happen. And I never had those kind of thoughts before. And it can happen.
Yes,
And it's like, okay, so do I want to just quit my job and maybe go into accounting because accounting is safer? Or do I want to kind of do what you said and really kind of figure out how to recover and how to, you know, be resilient? Because the definition of resilience is the capacity to recover quickly from difficulties, like having a toughness, springing back into shape, being almost like elastic like.
Yeah. And that's, you know, and that's where I might get emotional in this episode, because it's hard to talk about, because it is the most difficult thing that I have ever done, is actually stop to look in the mirror and say to myself, okay, you're not the same, and this is real. And, you know, you're talking about the thoughts that you, so this is what happened with me, and this has been a long-term thing. And, you know, I do, I want to share my story. There's so much of my story. We all have a story, and my story is no important than anyone else's. But I do feel that a lot of women can relate to the story. But I think, you know, for me, I'll just high level tell you that it started many years back when I had gotten a divorce, and I was fine with that. Like, I knew what I wanted for my life. I had no doubts. I could not be married anymore. I just had to move forward. But I don't have a typical family environment. My father passed away 21 years ago. I have the dynamic, as you guys probably already can tell, my mom had the nine brothers, my grandmother, but at the end of the day, it ends up, it's just myself, my mom, and my brother. So my mom never remarried. She's 55. She's an amazing person. I give her a lot of credit, but let's face it, that she had her own inability to understand life. She depended on us. We're her children. That was, my grandmother. We took care of her. And her fears of being alone projected a lot on my brother and I.
Wow.
And I then became subject to their fears. And sometimes I get emotional about it, but I look back. See, I told you I was going to get like this. This is like real talk. But I think, everything happens for a reason, and it's okay. Like, at the end of the day, I am where I am. If I look back and get bitter, my life will never be better. Yeah. So there are a lot of things that I did that were fear-based, and I was very resilient through that. Like, I knew, okay, my brother needs me. I have to stay. My mom, she's upset, and my worth is coming from this. And there's so much there that I'm just looking forward to talking about, where I think people will benefit from all of the therapy that I've had, and the life stories. And I don't want people to think, God, how can this girl help us? Like, she's a mess. Because I'm not a mess. And I'm not a mess because I choose not to be. Because I'm strong enough to know that I needed help. So where I'm going with this is, years ago through the divorce, I never got help. I was just resilient. I was like, tough girl, tough mudder girl. I'm going to just be a badass, and I'm going to this is what I'm doing, and that's it. And I gave in to those fears. Well, I was afraid of nothing except for disappointing my mother and not being there for my brother, and not living up to my dad with the promise that I left him on his deathbed, that I would always take care of them and be there for them. So there were all these things going on. So as time went on, I got very tired and worn out. Life went on. And I'll be honest with you, I lost my resilience. So when you talk about the ability to cope, like, I'd love to hear your thoughts on the trauma became so serious, the impact of all of that negativity and all of that being held back, which is what it was. I was being held back. I was not peaceful. And again, like, I'm not blaming anyone but myself, because in the end, I held myself back because I chose to allow those fears to dominate me because of my good heart. And that's okay. That's okay, because in the end, I do believe good brings good. And it was tough, but the resilience is not the same. And I really did break down. I did not have a nervous breakdown, but I had to make choices, and I felt very traumatized, and it was hard. And
Wow.
it was hard. So real talk, like, you can't sometimes just bounce back. So what I'm doing now is educating myself on how to bounce back, how to really become the person that I was before, less the fears, less knowing, okay, you know what? The whole world is not going to crumble if you're not there for them. It's okay. They're strong enough to be on their own too.
And I appreciate you sharing that, Denise, and because what I'm hearing is sometimes we put this incredible, unrealistic amount of pressure on ourselves. And it's like, you mentioned these promises, right? You mentioned these promises that you make. And definitely I've had promises, very same story. My father on his deathbed, me making promises, saying, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. And so I could totally identify with that, But, I think about how we are not the same person we were 5 years ago. 10 years ago. We're not the same, especially we're not the same person we were 20 years ago, like you're talking about.
I know.
So
I think
come
about
on.
that with you and I think, like, in the studio when we were with DJ Chris Rush, and just,
Yep.
Where we were in our life, and just so many different thoughts.
Yeah.
And I think we're very serious now.
And you think about the amount of growth though that
It's
people
true,
have,
yeah.
and we're allowed to grow. We're allowed to change our minds. We're allowed to say no.
Absolutely. Yeah.
We're allowed to go back on our word if we have to. And I'm not saying you and your specific examples, but just in general, just because I commit to something doesn't mean that I can't go back and say, you know what, listen, I changed my mind because I need to put myself first. And that goes back to our last episode of what the F is self care, feeling burnt
Right.
out, right?
Yeah.
Of we need to put ourselves first, because if we don't put ourselves first, everything's gonna suffer, and in the end, we're just gonna be racked with a ton of regret.
Yeah, and I love that you said that because there is so much guilt and shame thrown on people for putting themselves first. Even
Mm,
single people, like for example, me, I'm single, I don't have kids, but okay, I have my mother, and oh well, you should be there, and it's like you put all this pressure, or society puts pressure on you, and you're right, you cannot bounce back if you're not taking care of yourself. How can you take care of others?
yeah.
You cannot be resilient. You just can't. And if you are, I was saying before, tell that to somebody with ADHD, how to break a promise, because I take things so serious that it goes in my head, and I'm learning how to change my thought process, that I will over process, so that promise is so life or death to me.
Mm,
Or that situation, how you had mentioned before about you were having thoughts of the worst thing that could happen.
yeah.
Give
Thoughts of
give
impending
me
doom.
something that made thoughts of impending doom. Like
Yeah.
I had a situation like that maybe about 4 years ago, and I look back and I'm like, my God, I really wish that didn't happen, because the way my mindset works, I ran because it was like the worst possible case scenario. All you
Yeah.
have to do is plant a seed. And this is where, too, in our podcast, I think it's important for everyone to realize, like, we are a mental health resilient podcast. We
Yeah.
want to educate and teach people how to be resilient on your own, but
Yeah.
also how to, if you're living with someone or dating someone or married to somebody who has anxiety, ADHD, depression, more serious things like bipolar. I'm not the therapist, so I can only speak to the ADHD. But it's, I look at this and say we have to be sensitive and understand how to be compassionate and how to live with these people, because planting a seed could give them this
Yeah.
doom and gloom, and you might not mean it, but again, it's understanding, it's stopping the stigma, it's just compassion.
Yeah,
Right.
very very well said. And I've worked with clients, and I mean new mothers, and a new mother will say, I'm putting my child down to sleep, and I keep on having these invasive thoughts, or these
Mhm.
thoughts of impending doom, that what if this is the last time I ever see my child breathing?
Mm.
And it's like, your child is healthy, you're healthy.
Mhm.
These thoughts just kind of slowly creep in, and there's not one magic answer for these thoughts of impending doom. It might not be medication, or it might be medication. It
Mhm.
might not be therapy, but it might be therapy. I think it's usually a combination of a few different things. And it's important, if you are having thoughts like that, to definitely talk to a professional. Talk to a professional.
Absolutely.
Talk to keep good company. Talk to someone that you trust, and let them know, like, these are some of the fleeting thoughts that I'm
Mhm.
having. And but just in terms of resiliency, because we are just about out of time, just a couple quick characteristics of resilient people that I wanted to mention. Resilient people have strong social connections, and they
Mm.
identify as survivors, not victims. So sometimes it could just be about, and really what life is all about is just perspective,
Mhm.
right? If an event happens, or if something has happened to you over your lifetime, do you look at it like, why did that happen to me? Or, oh, I know why that happened, because I was able to learn from it. I know why that happened, because
Mhm.
then I was able to talk to this person about it.
Yeah.
And now, it's like, well, why do I have a diagnosis of bipolar disorder? Well, maybe it's so that you could truly help others and guide them and tell them your experience. I
Absolutely.
don't know.
Yeah, but and then you look, you say, okay, and then some of us are meant to just help ourselves, and we have to help ourselves before we can help others. And with resilience and how you talk about it, I love what I'm learning now, and I want to share this. So when we talk about resilience, we again talk about the ability to cope with a change, right? To come out of a trauma. So
Yep.
one thing that I've learned is the environment. Okay, so put yourself in an environment where you can grow. And maybe because that trauma might have happened in that environment. So now, okay, you need a change. So your environment is very important. I love what you said about they have strong social connections. Number 2, put yourself around people that are moving forward, that are not stuck. So people that are fearless, meaning they're ready to try new things. They're resilient. They're coping with change themselves. Find a group. Find a therapist. There's a lot of even talk groups, right?
Oh, yeah.
And obviously with everything going on with the pandemic, Google, because there are so many great virtual Zoom groups.
The Zoom groups and the Zoom meetings that are happening.
Amazing.
If there was one or two good things, I think there's probably been a lot of good things that have come out of this pandemic that we're finally getting out of. And that is, it has truly pushed healthcare forward. And not necessarily just doctor's appointments, but I mean just and the idea of being able to access help through Zoom. Now, Zoom was around before. Microsoft Teams, FaceTime, that was all around before. But people weren't really utilizing it the way that they are now and the way that they'll continue to utilize it moving forward.
It's interesting, too. I spoke with a therapist the other day, and she said more people are utilizing virtual groups because of confidentiality. So you could put just like, I could put D, let's just say, and then not show my face if I didn't have to.
Wow.
So there's a lot. So, we have the same resources, just better technology to keep our confidentiality.
I love it.
So
I love it.
So that's my thoughts on resilience. I got some emotions going on there. That took a lot of courage for me to say.
Great job.
And resilience, why I wanted to talk about it is because I am relearning it. So what I want our podcast listeners to realize is that it's never too late. It is never too late to learn how to jump back, how to become better, how to get out of the dark, I guess is the best way to say it.
I love it.
Become resilient. Push yourself forward.
I love it.
I just need Rob to, kick me in the butt.
It is never too late to come out of the dark. I think that's a perfect way to end this. And thank you very much, guys. Don't forget, check us out on Spotify, iTunes, subscribe, do all that good stuff. And thank you very much to Candlewood Coffee. Don't forget, we have our line of tea, Denise's Positivity, and Robbie's Roast, my own coffee. You can definitely go check that out. You can find the link on our Instagram and our website. Thank you very much to Paul the intern. And just thank you for tuning in, guys, and continuing to tune in.
Thank you. I just want to chime in one thing too. Paul, our intern, has a podcast also. So it's called Good Men Broadcasting. So we do post.
Not good men.
Good men. I'm a one-track mind. What do you want from me?
That's true.
Good
That's
men,
true.
men. Amen. My mom used to get mad in church when I used to do that. Amen.
Oh man. All right, guys. So with that being said, thank you very much for tuning in. I'm Rob Gerard.
I'm Denise Bertolovitz.
Have a good one.
Ciao.
I hope you enjoyed today's episode. You can check out other episodes of our podcast on iTunes, Spotify, and wherever else podcasts are streamed. Find us on Instagram at When Coffee Meets Tea Podcast or www.whencoffeemeetstea.com. Rob and Denise want to thank the listeners.